Welcome back to the Mind Poppers podcast. Before we get into this week's Mind Poppers, I want to preface the episode by saying that there was like a super moon last night, or a strawberry moon, whatever the fuck that is. And I hate to be this person. I do. But as a Cancer, as people at home be like, shut up! As a Cancer, you know, as a child of the moon, like, God, the moon really does just wreak havoc with me. It really, really does. So I was up until 5 a.m. last night. I just had all this energy. Usually on a full moon, I'll do like a lunar cosmic realigning. I know people at home be like, he's lost it. You know, I'll do some sort of thing anyway outdoors with the moon. But last night, I was just in bed and I could feel all this lunar energy. And I wasn't doing anything with it, and it was just very overwhelming. So I feel like I'm hungover today, you know. I don't know if Mercury was in Gatorade or whatever, but I'm just feeling fucked up today. I feel so disorientated. This week, I want to talk about, for the Mind Poppers, right? Thought we'd do a bit of a fun one. I want to talk about drugs. I want to talk about drugs and all the different drugs and the highs. So I know a lot of you will have no experience with drugs. Some of you will have dabbled, you know. Some of you maybe hardcore users, which is perfectly fine. But what I want to do, because there's a lot of drugs on this list that I haven't tried at all, but I'm curious to know about the high, even if you've no interest in taking drugs or what have you. It's still interesting, like, what's the feeling when you take them, you know? We all want to know that. Why do people, you know, get so deep in with drugs? And I don't want this podcast to come off as an endorsement of drugs. But you know what? Actually, I don't care. I don't care if you feel like this is an endorsement of drugs. You know, I'm not pressuring anyone to take drugs or whatever. We're just talking, okay? You're a grown-ass woman. You're a grown-ass man. You can handle your own shit. But at the very same time, I'm not condemning the use of drugs, you know. It's a personal choice, you know. Some of you will have tried it and have probably had terrible experiences. Some of you have taken stuff and it has rocked your shit, you know. But it's completely up to the individual. But before we get into that, I want to just talk about some current affairs, you know. You know how we like to do the news here. Something obviously that's going on at the moment is the Black Lives Matter movement. This is something, you know, because right now, really, like, the world is on fire. Let's face it. The world is burning. People don't really know what to do. But let me tell you, at least my relationship to the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, the thing for me is, like, years ago, I used to be one of those people who had a closed mind, you know, had absolutely no idea what was going on in the world, like, had no idea of other people's perspective or whatever. I was obviously embedded, you know, with white privilege, which we're all born with, all white people are born with, and you don't really pay attention to what's going on in the world or other people's hurt and the prejudice, because, like, you know, why would you? If you're born on a pedestal, you know, why would you willingly get down from that pedestal, if that makes any sense? And that's the way I felt, you know, all through my teens, late teens, whatever. But I suppose it was getting to know more about myself that helped my mind to open, which was my very first personal spiritual mind popper, was getting to know myself. When I say this, you know, it was me kind of figuring out who I was, questioning myself, and then eventually, you know, I guess, you know, accepting myself as a part of, like, the LGBT plus community, even though I hate labels, don't use them, don't fuck with them, but, you know, for the sake of argument and for the sake of just navigating this thought process, you know, we'll do what we have to do. And I guess it's that feeling, accepting myself into the LGBT plus community. You know, when you are, and I'm only talking about LGBT right now because, you know, that's the only thing I've experienced in, but when you are a part of that community, you know, there's a certain thing, you know, where you wake up every day, and there's always kind of like this thought in the back of your mind or whatever. But you know, every day that you wake up, that there is so many people out there who hate you, you know, just for living, just for breathing, just for being alive. There are so many people, you know, that hate you. and we grow up in schools, and we hear family talking, grandparents, parents, what have you, with a really homophobic rhetoric, you know, especially in Catholic Ireland, where we're instilled, all the shit about the Bible or whatever. Like, we know from a very, very, very young age that, homosexuality is regarded as a sin in the Catholic Church. And, in Ireland, it's not deemed as the ideal, for someone to be gay, lesbian, bi, or trans. So you know that. You live with that pain every day. It's just like this dull pain at the back of your head. You know every day that there are so many people out there that hate you just for living. You've never met these people, but they hate you. You know that. And like you look at the news and you're reading articles and you see, like, in the Middle East, what have you, like, LGBT people are being stoned to death. They are being thrown off the roofs of buildings. In Russia and Chechnya, the LGBT community, they're being put into concentration camps. That kind of a thing. The people in the States, they're being fired from their workplaces for being LGBT and what have you, and all that drama. And, the US government, constantly trying to undermine LGBT rights and that kind of thing. And I mean, you see with Trump's, the trans military ban, all that thing, just planted just for divisiveness, just to split people up. So when you're part of the LGBT community, in your heart that so much of the world hates you, and of course, so much of the world loves you. And that's fine. That's what I'm talking about. But it's growing up knowing that, that people will regard you as different just for being alive, just for breathing. It was through that kind of pain, and that, like I said, it was my first ever mind popper. It was getting to know myself. It was through that my eyes were able to open to the struggles of other people. And that's why I've always felt kind of, I don't know, a kinship, I guess, to black people in that regards. Because again, while obviously LGBT journeys or whatever are not at all the same as people of colour stories, they're being suppressed by the same people, by the same people. So they do share a lot of commonalities, even though their stories and their struggles are very different. But it was through that awakening for me that I was able to, years ago, do a deep dive into what it meant to be a person of colour in this world. And I was able to understand, their pain and their struggles, I guess, in more of a profound way, because I was able to relate it back to that feeling that I had of, just being treated differently, or that feeling, knowing that people hate you just for being alive. So that is why I've always felt a very strong kinship to the black community. And of course, I'm not saying, like, I understand what it means to be black. Of course, I don't understand what it means to be black, because I ain't black, but I'm definitely a cracker with a conscience, and I'm with an open mind. And a lot of people right now, one thing that's really bugging me right now about the conversation around the whole Black Lives Matter movement is, and people, I've heard people being like, yeah, it's awful, what's happening, but the riots and the looting, that's just not right. That's not right. That's like a disgrace to George Floyd's memory kind of a thing, my thought process on this is that, people now who are like suddenly be like, oh my God, racism exists, because of the trend of the Black Lives Matter movement. Please don't. Like if only now you are opening your eyes even somewhat, even a millimeter, to racism, and it's only happening now, then that is an issue. That's a problem. For how many years have we been hearing about unarmed black people, black kids being shot, in a lot of such situations where they haven't even committed a crime, and again, we see this outpouring from the African American community in the States, basically just pleading, being like, please stop killing our kids, killing our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers, please stop. And it always falls on deaf ears. Every single time, white ears remain closed. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. So now that you, and let's be clear, these aren't the first riots and protests to happen, not at all. But now, for whatever reason, it's just become, a global. It's become projected onto the global stage. But I mean, like, and people, it's that whole question. I mean, like, what do they have to, do those protesters have to go out and riot and loot or whatever? And my thought on it is, I mean, like, how long can these people, black people who have lost family, who've lost children to just sheer police brutality? And we're not even talking about like full scale racism at this point. We're not talking about the full spectrum. We're looking at one segment of that being police brutality. Like, how long can they plead? How long can they beg and cry for you to stop killing their fucking children? And falling again on deaf white ears. How long do you expect them to do that? And at least now, they're like, people are being heard. The black community is being heard. Now, again, like I said, it's still falling on a lot of, closed white ears, deaf white ears. But God, I mean, can you imagine if that was white kids, white unarmed kids being shot and killed by police brutality? White people would burn this fucking planet to the ground. To the fucking ground. So, like, the charities that I've been involved with over the last couple of weeks, I've been directly trying to send funds to people on the front lines, black youth activists on the front lines, just things for like street medics, who are out there on the protest or at the protest, treating people, gas masks, water, supplies, all that kind of thing. And again, bail bonds, which is, paying to actively get people out of incarceration, people who are being arrested at the protests and what have you. Again, on my Instagram, I have it in my bio, a very handy link for you to really kind of get involved with fundraising in a very direct way on the front line. But that was my whole point. It was my kinship to the black community stemmed from getting to know myself. And once I saw how the world saw me, if you get me, or people like me, it kind of allowed my mind to perceive how other people, are being treated as well, if that makes sense. And the whole thing is, a lot of these groups who are being constantly put down, like, obviously you have people of colour, you have women, you have the LGBT community, and different religions or whatever. It's the same person that's putting them down. It's the same person that's putting them down. And I hate to say it, because I know people freak out when they hear it, when you say straight white Christian men. I know that it's a very hot word because it sends, obviously, those guys crazy. But, for a lot of civilization, straight white Christian men have been on the top of the societal pyramid. They have been the rulers to everybody. And I mean this by saying, I'm trying to find the words to logically explain this and say this with a bit of substance. But you've had these people who've remained at the very top of the pyramid, and they like to layer us all kind of beneath. Not saying that all the struggles that these minorities go through is the same. It's absolutely not. Every single one of us goes through a completely different journey. But it is the same. It's the same group of people, that try to keep everybody else down. And it's not to say that every single straight white person, male, who's born, is homophobic, is racist, is blah, 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 is misogynistic, whatever. But the thing is, and this is, I guess, the crux of what I've been trying to say, the thing is, when you were born into that privilege to being a straight white Christian male, the privilege that comes with that is you are one of those people who when they wake up every day, the whole world doesn't hate them just for being born, just for being themselves, if you get me, you know? Like, obviously, it's a extremely patriarchal society that we live in, you know, so that as a woman, when you wake up every day, you know that a lot of the world is against you, or a lot of the systems at play in the world are to bring you down or to impede your progress, you know, compared to the straight white male counterparts. The very same way with people of colour, you know, they have to wake up every day knowing racism, feeling that hatred, you know, in their soul, that directed at them just for being alive. And the same way with the LGBT community. Again, I'm not trying to say that because I'm talking about the Black Lives Matter, it's completely different. It's completely different from the other groups I'm talking about. I know that. But I'm just trying to make kind of a general kind of point here, is that some of these people, you know, these straight white Christian males who are born, they don't know what it's like. They've never felt that. They've never woken up having to feel like the world is against them just for being alive, just for breathing. They've never had to feel that. So in that way, I can understand how they are unable to perceive what everyone else has to go through, because they've never lived it. Unless you have that feeling where you wake up every day knowing that the world is against you and the systems of the world are against you, just for living, just for being who you are, just for living, things you cannot change. And they've never experienced that, you know? And I think I can only imagine it must be very hard to perceive what everybody else is saying when you've never had to live that, when that's never been a part of your life, you know? Because that pain that you go through, you know, for being, like, I would just say, different in terms of the way people are trying to paint the world, you know, unless you've experienced that, like, God, because that opens your mind, it expands your mind 100%. Like, if you're one of those people who go through that sort of pain, then God, your mind just has to open to the pain of others. You know, I mean, at least it should, unless you're a real dumb fuck, like, it really, really should. It's your duty to, if you're one of these suppressed people in any regard, it is your duty, you know, to stand by the other suppressed groups and to uplift them 100%. And it is your duty to get to know and become familiar and educate yourself as much as possible in what these other people have to go through, because their journey and their problems and their struggles are completely different to yours. So you have to be educating yourself. So I don't want to be hearing now that, like, oh my God, racism is a thing? What? How come nobody said anything about this? You know, the way because everyone's going on Instagram now, like, a lot of people, like, a lot of these influencers, you know, like, oh my God, how did I not know this was going on? Like, that's some bullshit, you know? But at least now, do better, you know? Do better. And I mean, look, if you're listening to this podcast, your mind is already so much more open than a lot of people, you know? So I know you guys don't need to be hearing this. But the thing about what's going on in America, this is just my own thought process or whatever, like, I can understand it completely, you know, because America is, you know, it's not an exception to the rule, but it's a weird one, because, you know, America, you had the widespread slavery, you know, like, 100 years ago in the States, you know, African American people were considered to be property. You know, there was no laws protecting them. They were treated worse than animals, you know, murdered, raped, tortured by white people, by white families for years and years and years. And that's only 100 years ago, or not far off that. And then if you want to flash forward to modern day, like, the pain that echoes from that, and the subconscious and mental scarring that echoes forward into present time, even into white people, you know, that has to plant subconscious things in heads and in minds, because you think back and it's like, why were people treated this way? Why were they treated as fucking slaves? You know, and the echo from the past, it just messes with people's heads, and it just affects them on a subconscious level, and people don't know how to process that, because you can't just, you know, rub your hands off and be like, okay, we're equal now and everything's fine. I mean, surely that can't be the way. That can't be the way, surely. You can't go from someone being your fucking property, someone who you tortured, murdered, abused for decades, and then what, a century later being like, okay, we good. You know, we are good. It's all even now. It's a a level playing field. I think that's what people really, really do not understand. You cannot go from that, you know, to now saying that everyone's equal and everyone has equal opportunity. It doesn't work like that. It does not work like that. There has to be constant work into this, and of course there isn't. You know, America is a very racist country. There's no point in saying otherwise, and it's not even that, but it's built on a racist foundation, and the system is built to suppress people of color, and that's just a fact. That is just a fact. There is nobody in the United States, as a person of color, who is going to have the same opportunities as their white counterpart. It's just absolutely not the way. Like, that system, in my opinion, and again, this is just my own thought process, it needs to be fucking broken down to its very core and rebuilt. The system isn't broken in America. The system was designed to target vulnerable people, the African American community, 1000%. You know, ideally, on talking about this, especially while we have the protests going on at the moment, ideally I'd like to have, you know, people of color on the podcast telling me about their experiences, rather than, you know, my perception of what's going on and all that. Again, because I'm a white person, so I'll never be able to speak on what it's like to be a black person, and what that means and how that feels navigating the world. Ideally, I would like to be able to do that and be able to have people on and talk. Currently, like, we are 7 episodes in, okay? We are still recording from the basement, the Mind Popper's basement. We do not have the technology to facilitate that right now, okay? Especially when Imagine is trying to squeeze me for €60 fucking month for broadband, okay? We are doing this on a mobile hotspot, okay? But when the technology arrives, absolutely, I would love to. In the meantime, my sister podcast, the It Gals, Jenny and Lindsay, had some fantastic people on, sharing their experiences on their latest episode of the It Gals podcast. So check that out. Check that out for a more in-depth look, more in-depth than what I can offer you right now. But without further ado, let us get on to the rest of the episode on a lighter note. So, the first drug we're going to talk about for this week's Mind Popper is weed, marijuana. What gets you high in weed is a thing called THC. If I'm correct, that is an abbreviation for, well, not an abbreviation, but it's short for Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. Yeah. And I didn't even read that from a fucking phone, okay? That's a little slow. But THC in the marijuana is what gets you high. And let me tell you, I think that weed is one of the most beautiful things this universe, this planet has bestowed upon us. Weed can be absolutely stunning, amazing, groundbreaking, game changer, the sister I never had. You know, being with people and being stoned is absolutely incredible. You know, it bonds people together. A lot of you who are stoners, who are regular stoners, will understand that. You know, you'll have this one friend who is your stoner soulmate. You know, just being together stoned it's just the best possible experience. You laugh together, floods of tears. It's just an amazing experience, and it can just bring you so much closer. And I have a stoner soulmate. Her name is, I probably won't say her name. It's Sinead. But she's my stoner soulmate. And, you know, being stoned with her is it's just some of the best times I've ever had, you know? Absolutely, some of the best times I've ever had. But what is the high like when smoking weed? Say if you're at home and you've never smoked. You know, it's a ride, you know, it's mellow, it's calm, it's relaxing. It's just like it's just hard to describe. It is hard to describe. The internet now, greatest.com, I will read to you. They describe it as being a relaxation, increased hunger, sensitivity to light, color, touch, taste, and smell. That is like for your kind of physical parts of the high. But then you also have, to all drugs, you have an emotional aspect, an emotional high. How does it affect you emotionally, this high? Weed, then, it's very much kind of associated with euphoria, creativity, and I guess amusement, like, you know, laughing your ass off kind of a thing. And it obviously, like, your high depends on the strain, the dosage, the potency, all of that, and how you consume it. You know, do you smoke weed? Do you vape weed? Do you consume weed? You know, in terms of foods, you know, which is a big and bustling growing market as cannabis food, edibles, oils, THC oil, that kind of a thing. And let me tell you, it's one hell of a time. It's just one hell of a time. And then being stoned by yourself as well is also an amazing experience. Being stoned by yourself, it can be like, oh my God, just an abundance of creativity. There have been times when I've been stoned and just thinking in my head and following my thought processes and my train of thoughts or whatever, and see where they lead me. And I have just come to understand some like fundamental things about the universe, you know, and about myself. Like, being high on weed can just offer you such an open gateway into introspection and understanding things about yourself and why you think certain things, and questioning. It honestly can expand your mind to new horizons. It honestly truly can. I have to say that it can. And then there's the flip side to it as well, you know, smoking weed. The high off weed, there can also be a downside 100%. It depends where you stand emotionally with yourself, you know, because of course if there's, you know, things that drag you down and depression, all that, and, you know, speaking from personal experience, I have never been someone who has like been like emotionally stable, you know, ever. Like, I am just a complete mess in terms of emotions. Complete mess. I'm a complete overthinker. It's just the way I am, you know. So you can also take the high to kind of a darker place where you do look introspectively at the darker things about yourself and the darker things about your life, and these like focal points of depression and anxiety. 1000% you can. Which is obviously just the same with any drug, I think. But then you have like things called, if again I'm talking to like someone who's never smoked a day in their life, there's things called a whitey, pulling a whitey, which is I think like scientifically it's where you have an imbalance, like with your blood sugar levels, they go so low, so you can like faint, or you feel nauseous, or you'll vomit, or what have you, shit yourself possibly. Pulling a whitey, let me tell you, it's not fun. It is not fun. It's actually terrible. I've pulled more whiteys than I could count on my hands. Like I remember one time we were at like a beach or something, and we were smoking. And when you have a group of like more than like 3 people sometimes, and people are smoking, they'll do like puff puff pass, which is basically, it was like you might spark up 2 joints at a time, and that will go round in the little circle. So you're smoking, like, it's like, oh my God, you've just handed the joint away, and another one is just coming then to you, and you're like, fuck me. Of course you don't want to look like a pussy. You don't want to be like, no, I'll sit this one out. So you're just smoking way too much, way too quickly, and your blood sugar levels are just falling to the floor. I remember one time, and I had reached that level, I knew I was about to whitey, and I said to my friend who was driving, I was like, can we go home soon? Because I think I really have to poo. And, you know, one of the side effects of pulling a whitey is that overwhelming to release your bowels and shit everywhere. And I was going through that. I was like turtle heading for sure, like paging Dr. Turtlehead. Absolutely. I was ready to shit myself. And they were like, yeah, we'll go in a minute. We'll go in a minute. Bam. I hit the Strand like a ton of fucking, like a sack of shit. Hit the Strand, puking everywhere. Of course, everyone's laughing because, like, you know, you're not gonna overdose on a whitey. Like, I don't think there's any known lethal dose of marijuana. No one has ever died from smoking marijuana. But of course, I was the laughing stock, getting sick on the stones, and people were like, "I thought you needed to go for a shit." I was like, "I did need a shit, bitch," but it just came out another hole. And there was another time I pulled a whitey. Remember we went back to, it was like a friend's garage. It was late at night. I think it was maybe after work when I was working in a hotel. We went back to like a garage and we were smoking. Again, doing this whole puff puff pass thing. There's just too much marijuana going around. And one of my friends started putting a whitey. And he almost, it was like, almost like a seizure before he fell to the floor. It was kind of like a kind of a thing. He wasn't foaming at the mouth or anything. But he collapsed onto the floor, and this same friend, you know, was only kind of recently enough recovering from surgery from cancer, and he'd been given the all clear, but still, like, in my mind was racing. I was like, oh my god. I was like, he's dying. That's it, curtains, he's gone, he's dead. And I can't see this right now. I can't go through this right now in my state, you know, being high. I can't see this. So, and God, that pushed me, seeing him pull a whitey, then pushed me over the edge to the point where I started whiteying. And it was all a bit of a blur for me. But the lad said that I like fell back like the kind of like a, you know, with like one back of the hand on the forehead. You know, like Princess Diana. I was like, and I remember I fell back and someone got me in their arms. Like I was being carried around like in the fucking bodyguard, like I was Whitney Houston. And I'd fallen back into someone's arms while the other person, you know, who had actually had the whitey in the first place, you know, my friend who was recovering from cancer, like, bam, hit like the concrete garage floor. But there was me then, and he was like, oh my god, you couldn't even let me have my moment. You had to just come in and steal the limelight. You know, I was like, I collapsed into one of the lad's arms. You know, very delicately. It was done it was very classy. And then of course I was getting sick in the drain, like, and previously the other lads had gone out to get my friend who had cancer, had gone out to get him some sugar water, which, you know, is what they give people to bring back up the sugar levels when they're pulling a whitey. And so they brought him back sugar water, and by the time they got back from the kitchen, he was like sitting upright, you know, like on a bench in the garage, like he was fine. And they're bringing it over to him, and they're like, wait a second, what the hell is happening to me? And there was me panting out in one of the lads' arms. Be like, what happened? What happened to Mary Lou? You know? Where's the drama coming from? But it was scary. And for the whole thing, I was like, oh my god, you guys. Oh my god. Oh my god. I was like, there's something in the weed. There's something in the weed. Someone has spiked the weed. I don't know what's happened. Because you see, I saw him drop. And then I dropped. So I was looking around the room waiting for all the rest of the lads to start dropping, you know? I was like, oh my god. Because, again, paranoia can be a bad symptom of being high on weed. And I was like, oh my god. I was like waiting for everyone to drop. Like we'd all just been poisoned. Like some sort of murder mystery shit, you know? So I was like, oh my god, you guys. I was like, I don't know what's going on. But I have a feeling that this weed has been tapped. Someone has tampered with our weed. Okay? There's heroin in the weed, you guys. There's a colonial woman on the wing of the plane. And just for that, I don't know, half hour, however long that lasted. I was like, shit. I was like, we're all going to die. But look, in saying that, don't let these two horror stories that I've shared with you about the highs of marijuana put you off it. Absolutely, because it is an absolutely beautiful, stunning experience, you know, for the most part. 100%. The next thing we want to talk about is Xanax. Xanny. Very kind of, kind of rocketed into pop culture in the last couple of years, especially amongst like these mumble rappers. Billie Eilish even has a song called Zanny. Um, Never had Xanax in my life. I haven't, but I know it's pretty popular, and I know it's actually become very easy now to buy on the streets. Yeah, I'm down with the streets. um, but for me, Xanax was always like the drug of like a white woman in her late 50s, a lady of leisure, who can sit around like the mansion all day, drinking champagne, and will have a couple of Xanny, like will blend it into her health shake, just to keep her going. Or another thing that like maybe something people would take on planes or something. So I'm not very familiar with it at all. So of course I'm doing a bit of googling, whatever. I'm just looking into it because again I'm interested in what the high of Xanax is like. But basically, what Xanax is like, I'm not sure. I think it's an actual brand name. So Xanax actually isn't the drug itself, but it's a brand name for alprazolam, I think. But it's like it's a benzos, which are highly addictive. But like you take them orally and they're like absorbed through the stomach, I guess, into the blood or what have you. But so I wanted to find out what the high on a Xanny is like. So I was googling it, and I was googling people's like personal experiences. So one person wrote on their experience with being high on Xanax. They say it's really one of the best highs you can have, and still mostly functional. Don't drive while under the influence of anything still. Xanax kicks in really quickly and lasts a little bit. While you ride your high and you get a physical and emotional relaxation, life is perfect with just one. Although they say every good thing has to balance out, and these things have their share of negative connotations. Mixed with alcohol, it can be very dangerous, at least causing blackouts. Not to forget, since the high is very desirable, one can easily start a benzo addiction. And I guess the whole thing is moderation, moderation, moderation. And a lot of people, will be prescribed, a lot of you and your experience with Xanax or different types of benzos, maybe, because a lot of them are prescribed for like anxiety disorders and that kind of thing. So maybe you've already experienced it in not even a recreational way, but in a treatment way. Again, I don't really know a whole lot about Xanax. It's never been something that's hugely appealed to me, if you get me. The next drug on our mind poppers list is crack. Yes, crack. Crack, I'm very excited about doing this. And that's actually how this whole episode even came into fruition. I was talking with my friend Sinead, and she was telling me about I think it was something, what someone had said or someone had did. And I was like, oh, maybe they did it, with clear intentions or whatever, or maybe they did it because it made them feel good or whatever. And she was like, yeah, but that person also smokes crack. I was like, okay. You don't need to know the context of that. But that is how we started talking about crack. And I was like, God, would you ever try crack? And she was like, no, I definitely wouldn't try crack. And I was like, yeah, I'm kind of the same. Because it's like there's a negative connotation surrounding it. Like, oh, she smokes crack. He smokes crack, a crackhead. No one wants to be a crackhead, But it is a growing popular drug and is easily available on the streets, And I said to her, I was like, well, what about, okay, let's say, if me and you were like locked in, like, say, this small apartment for an entire week, we couldn't leave, we were super bored, there was no weed or anything, but there was some crack. There was some crack left out on the table. Would we smoke crack? And she was like, I mean, we could try it. But the thing about crack is, in our discussion, we were like, oh, well, it's meant to be, super addictive. So I was like, okay, well, what about if, for this hypothetical week, we smoke the crack, but have already set up to go straight into a rehab center, like a really nice rehab center, like the celebrities go to, on the last day when the crack is gone. So she was like, look, I'm not ruling it out. I'm not saying no to crack. I'm saying no right now, and I respected that. But I was doing some research into crack as a drug and the high that comes with crack, because, and smoking crack, because it's something that interests me, and it's very embedded in pop culture, but I knew really nothing about it. So I was reading an article on the New Republic, and I'll just read a brief little bit for you, but the author writes, but crack is something else. Probably no one making our government's drug policy has ever smoked a rock of crack cocaine. nor is anyone who regularly reports or comments in the media on the ravages of crack capitalism. Now, I won't argue that you have to smoke crack to understand the war on drugs, any more than you have to kill someone to understand the war in Vietnam. And I certainly wouldn't argue that crack isn't hazardous or anyone should try it. Having been through the experience, though, may facilitate a certain realism about the conflict in question. So this author for the New Republic is going on to talk about their, experiences, I think, for the first time smoking crack. Crack is a pleasure, both powerful and elusive. Smoke a rock, and for the next 20 minutes, you will likely appreciate sensuous phenomena ranging from MTV to neon lights to oral sex. Okay, I'm into it. After your 20 minutes is up, you will have a chemical aftertaste in your mouth, and in all likelihood, the sneaking desire to smoke another rock. To see what it's all really about, just one more. You'll want to pick up a $25 rock, which can be split into 4 or 5 smaller rocks. As you smoke your second rock, it may strike you that the crack high combines the best aspects of marijuana and cocaine. The pleasure of pot is not just a high but a buzz. Smoke a joint and space out. Cocaine, in contrast, is clearly a high stimulant to sociality, do a line and get into some serious play or some pleasurable work. Crack is both spacey and intense. It has the head rush of marijuana or amyl nitrate with a clarity induced by a nose full of powder cocaine. When I remember reading this for the first time, I kept going back to the line, crack is both spacey and intense. Like, what Lana Del Rey lyric is that, But of course, before this, I was like, of course I'm never going to smoke crack. But I took a screenshot of this article and I sent it to my friend Sinead. And we were both kind of hooked on the crack is both spacey and intense. I'm like, ooh, who is she? I'm like, oh my God, do I want to smoke crack now? But again, just that description of it, of course, it sounded amazing. Sounded like straight out of a Lana Del Rey song. The author goes on to write, there's no disputing... Oh, sorry, no. We're about to move on to another drug. But so of course, when you read that sounds amazing. Spacey and intense. But again, I guess the whole thing about crack is it is super addictive. It's this whole thing about chasing the high. So I guess, it's just not a good idea, especially if you're not someone who has strong willpower. And even if you are someone who has strong willpower, sometimes that's not enough. So, it's all fun and games to also talk about the high of crack, the high of smoking crack. Did you smoke crack? Absolutely, because I'm curious. I've never smoked crack, and I do have this burning desire to know about the highs of these drugs. It's just something that's very interesting to me. Not saying that I'll ever smoke crack, and it's all well and good for us to talk about the highs of crack, but the dangers of a lot of these drugs and the addiction to them is just off the charts. It's something, that the strongest people in the world can't control. So you have to keep that in mind. All we're doing now is exploring the highs. All right. And I'm not going to go into many lows, but you have to keep that in mind. Absolutely. I remember the iconic interview with Whitney Houston, and I think maybe was it with Diane Sawyer? It was at least Diane Sawyer-esque, one of these American interviewers. And they were talking about Whitney's, and it's a brilliant interview, you should Google it. They're talking about Whitney's drug use and does she overdo it and all that. And I think it could have been Barbara Walters or Diane Sawyer, but the interviewer is like, and what about crack? And Whitney is like, shuts it down straight away. She's like, She's like, we don't smoke crack. She's like, let's just get one thing straight. We don't smoke crack. Crack is cheap. We don't do that. Crack is whack. And it is. The next drug I want to talk about in the Mind Poppers podcast, Drugs Edition, is cocaine. And if you're listening to this, whether you have taken cocaine, whether you recreationally take cocaine, or you definitely know someone who takes cocaine, cocaine has just become a massive part of the culture. And perhaps it always has. I can only talk in my own experience and what I've seen. Was it as big in the day as it was, when our parents were going around, or your parents, what have you. Like cocaine for me, right? The whole thing about cocaine is in theory, cocaine is like a very classy drug. You know, cocaine is the drug of the rich and famous. You know, cocaine is the drug of the supermodels, you know? So, cocaine, I guess, in one light, has very glamorous connotations around it. But, I mean, as you'll see it, how it's actually lived out. I mean, yes, that can be beautiful, you know. You have this beautiful image like me sitting down, be like, excuse me, you know, while I go powder my nose, you know, beautiful, beautiful. But then when you go and you actually see people, you know, who take cocaine recreationally, and like they're snorting a line off the dirty cisterine in some grimy little pub toilet, and you're like, okay, that's disgusting. That is revolting, you know. It's like when you take all the class out of cocaine, you know, it really loses the magic, doesn't it? You know, seeing people huddled around a dirty fucking toilet seat, snorting coke, it really does. You know, it's a far cry from the modeling world, you know, of cocaine. And the high with cocaine is it's very hard to describe. It's like super caffeine rush. It's like your body's tingling. You're intense. You're very in the moment. You're talking shit. And you know what? I'll be honest. You know, back in the day, back in my modeling days, you know, when I was just they were like, oh, there's Riley. He's just a party girl with a bad habit. Back in the days, like in my late teens and like very early 20s, you know, I played around with cocaine a bit, you know, because I worked in a nightclub or whatever, so I was just around that. I was around that a lot. And I enjoyed it, sure, for a couple of years, but it never stuck with me. You know, there was a point where back in the day, and this was years ago, I was going up to the city for my friend's birthday, and he had ordered he had ordered cocaine from like, I guess it was like the black market or the dark web, whatever was online. So it had been posted out to him. And it just wasn't good for me, you know. I didn't even leave pre-drinks, you know. Everyone was going, I didn't even leave pre-drinks. I was, you know, trying to make myself get sick, you know. I was doing I was doing what you call it, a tactical gawk, you know, to clean the system out before going out, and I never made it out. I was tucked into bed by the lads, and they put on the US office, and I sat there for the night while they were out. And you know, all I can say about cocaine and my relationship with it is, there came a point in my life, like I guess like 2 or 3 years ago, where my anxiety just became something that was like, it just came out of the blue like a wave, and I didn't even notice it. It crept on me, you know, because in terms of like coffee and stuff, you know, I used to love, like, I'd have like 5 cups of coffee a day, and I'm like, on my lunch breaks when I was working in the shop, and you know, we smoking like 4 cigarettes, 4 fags every break, you know, down in the coffee, smoking cigarettes. And for me, it just came out of nowhere. But I can't drink coffee anymore because of my anxiety. I cannot drink coffee anymore. Like, my body rejects it. I go into total like shaking, you know. Even a decaf coffee, I can't do anymore. And even going abroad, I can't do, like, a little fun fact about me, I can't drink alcohol abroad, you know. Like, when I went to Miami last year, I couldn't touch alcohol. I couldn't drink it. I would get one gin and take a couple of sips, and just have the overwhelming to hurl. My anxiety is just so bad. It crept up on me out of nowhere. And I really don't know why, or why. I mean, God, I know why, but it's just something that I've never been able to put under wraps or to control. So I can't drink coffee anymore. I can't even drink alcohol in foreign fucking countries anymore. It's absolutely crazy. But of course, it rules out drugs like cocaine, because it has such a similar buzz to this whole caffeine kind of high, that God, it just won't work for me or for my body anymore, like, at all. The same way with you know, back in the day, back in the early days of modeling, you know, trying, you know, ecstasy and MDMA. First of all, ecstasy, like pills, dirty, dirty, dirty drug. Absolutely disgusting. And of course, look, I had my fun. I had my day in the sun with them when I was living up in Dublin years ago, with ecstasy, because we'd go on a night out, before we hit the clubs, and you'd be in town, and of course, obviously, it's been exposed since. But the rickshaws, up in Dublin City, now it has been exposed since. I ain't ratting, I ain't no rat. This has already been in the papers or what have you. But they would run like a big drug ring, through the rickshaws. They operate a massive drug ring under the guise of rickshawing, and that's where we'd get our pills. When we were heading on a night out to the clubs. And let me tell you something. The come down for me, who is already an emotionally unstable person. Whew! Woo! Oh my god! For those of you who have no idea about drugs, some drugs, like your cocaine and your pills and your ecstasy, they come with a come down. You have to pay the piper. The genie grants you a wish, but you gotta pay somehow. And you pay the next day with a come down, because things like with like ecstasy, Molly, what have you, it puts your hormones into overdrive. So your brain, the part of your brain that produces serotonin, is working in overdrive. It's just, all the happy feelings. That's where that feeling of euphoria comes, that serotonin release. And then obviously the next day, and the next 2 days, the next 3 days, your hormone levels are so off, such an imbalance, because your brain is depleted of serotonin. So you're just down in the depths of depression. Oh my god. The times where I lay in my little meter by meter room in Dublin, coming down the days after, and just feeling, oh my god, like suicidal, like bawling my eyes out. Whew, fuck, it was tough, and I am not emotionally strong to power through a come down. So that's why I had to leave that in my very early 20s, late teens. I can't fuck with that shit no more. I'm not emotionally strong enough for ecstasy. And I remember one of the nights we were out, my friend in college had taken ecstasy as well, and she's like me, very emotionally unstable. Sorry. But she is. And her come down was so bad the next day that she went to the university nurse and was like, I think somebody may have spiked my drink with ecstasy. Well, and nobody did. The bitch bought the ecstasy. She's like, I think somebody spiked my drink with ecstasy. And was going through, she was like, I might have taken it by an accident. I can't remember. Like told the nurse all her symptoms, and she's like, I just feel terrible. I feel like the world's against me. And she had to go and get a fucking prescription. The nurse was like, go home, get into your bed and sleep it off. You're not dying. You're not poisoned. You took ecstasy. And now you have to pay the piper. And I guess the thing is, the thing to watch out for with your cocaine, with your MDMA, with your Molly, with your ecstasy, and the likes of that, is the feeling of euphoria that high offers people who take that. It's chasing that high. It's always wanting to feel that way. Again, very addictive substances, And that's where that would be people's downfall. And, whatever about being a stoner and getting stoned all the time, whatever. But being addicted, like falling into a cocaine addiction or, addicted to pills, ecstasy, MDMA, like that's dangerous. And it's a very, very hard hole to climb out of. I can only imagine. And my heart goes out with people, battling addiction 100%. Now, moving on to our next my bopper. Again, this is for entertainment purposes, okay? Look, I'm not telling any of you bitches to go and smoke crack. If you go and smoke crack, be it off your own back, Don't try to slap me with a solicitor's letter, alright? Because I have the best solicitor in town. For the final drug I want to talk about, and yes, I only picked a handful of drugs that were topical. I was debating whether and looking at, like, say, ketamine or LSD, acid, ayahuasca, magic mushrooms, like all the hallucinogenics, that kind of thing, which would be absolutely fascinating, DMT fascinating. But that's a different episode. I wanted to talk about just kind of party drugs, that we're all around all the time. So the final drug I want to look at in this episode of the Mind Poppers is heroin. Heroin, it definitely has negative connotations with it. It's often, attached with the word junkie. A junkie who's someone who's thrown up on the gear, the thing about heroin is you can see firsthand, really, can't you, how it's ruined people's lives. It's ruined people's lives. And I guess the fascinating thing for me about heroin, and I always thought about, right, we can see how it absolutely wipes people out, it ruins people's lives. But the question I've always asked myself is, what must the high be like on heroin that's so fucking good that brings people back and back, even though it's killing them, it destroys lives? What must that high be like, So I was looking on the internet again, because obviously I've never tried heroin, I never will try heroin. One, because I've seen what it does to people. Two, I don't like needles. But I was looking at a Vice article, where the reporter asked people about, describing their first times trying heroin, and it's actually very interesting, and you can kind of understand it. Well, first of all, the author in this Vice article starts off, he says, "There's no disputing that heroin ruins lives. So why do people do it? Probably because, as one guy at a shitty nightclub urinal once explained to me, it's like you are fucking God himself." He then shook his dick and looked up the tainted ceiling and added, nostalgically, "Chasing the dragon is a magical thing, man." And I guess the whole thing about chasing the dragon, that's the term that people use, is like your first high. Like your first high is so euphoric, is so amazing, that you spend the rest of your addicted life, at least, you spend the rest of your life trying to chase that high, trying to get back to that high, trying to reach Mount Olympus once more, but always falling short at the peak, So some of the people who tried heroin for the first time, these are their accounts. So, how did you come to try heroin for the first time? Enza: I was 18 and I'd just broken up with a boyfriend. Some friends of friends came over and I knew they were doing heroin, and I was curious, so I asked one of the guys. Junkie etiquette is you don't shoot up a newbie because you don't want them to turn out like you, unless you ask more than once, which I did. So we drove down to Smith Street in Collingwood and he scored for us. He went first, then shot me up. How did it feel? It was instantly fucking amazing. It felt like everything was melting and everything was somehow better. Nothing mattered. It lasted about 5 or 6 hours and I felt really floaty and nice. How did the first time change your life? I wanted to do nothing else but feel that way. I decided almost immediately that this was going to be my life. I ended up using consistently for about a year after that. How often is consistently? She goes on to say that she was doing it like multiple times a day for several months. And how did you feel? How did those months feel? The reporter asks. I didn't give a fuck about anything or anyone. I'd been a very anxious person up until that point. I had a lot of problems, a shitty childhood and a really fraught relationship with family and friends. And I just felt like I was home, that I'd found people who I could relate to, and this drug was fucking amazing. How do you feel about talking about this now? I feel okay with it. I mean, you get to a point where that's all you think about, and that's all you want, and you think of the different fucked up ways to get it. It was a shitty time, but in hindsight, I don't regret it. It made me who I am, I suppose. Do you think you'll ever go back to it? No. Because if I do, I'll never stop. Now, I'll talk about one more encounter, an interesting one. Sebastian, who's 45, again, recounting his first experience with heroin. Hey Sebastian, can you set the scene for me? What made you try heroin and how was it? Sebastian: I was 19 years old. I was at a party where I talked to a man who convinced me that heroin was a good thing. He said yes, it's highly addictive, but if you use it very infrequently, you won't become addicted. And I went, that's logical. I'll try it once. So I tried it. It was a bit of a spectator sport. There was about half a dozen people looking on, and he had readied a plastic garbage bin for me to vomit in. Then he put a tourniquet on my arm, I presume that's some sort of medical equipment, found a vein and got a fresh new needle out of a packet. He drew up the heroin and explained to me what he was doing. He gave me a full hit. He blew on my arm as he was injecting me, and it was the least painful injection I've ever had. He took his time, was very slow, injected it fully in, and got the tourniquet off. Then he bid me to sit back in an armchair and relax, which I did. What is the main recollection of that moment? Lots of warmth, different waves of warmth around my body, and then all of a sudden I hurled into the bin, much to the laughter of everyone around me. Then I sat back and the rush turned, and oh my God, it was good. It was very good. I didn't know that I could have that much sensation in my body. I didn't know that I was capable of feeling that much enjoyment. The initial rush lasted oh my God. My friend Kate just texted me in the middle of that. I didn't know that I could have that much sensation in my body. I didn't know that I was capable of feeling that much enjoyment. The initial rush lasted about 20 minutes. Why do I keep saying rush? Like going back to the rush. Like going back to that whole Pierce Brosnan like I did in that last episode. Like, oh, money penny. Sean Connery. It was very good. I didn't know that I could have that much sensation in my body. I didn't know that I was capable of feeling that much enjoyment. The initial rush lasted about 20 minutes, and there was 6 to 8 hours where I was very relaxed, calm, and had a sense of heightened well-being. How did it change your life after that? It made me less worried about my relationship with rules and laws. I started to realise that there was so much more to life than what I had been led to believe and accept. I started to get into some fairly serious hedonism and mysticism and fairly serious questioning of the paradigm. Are you describing heroin addiction? Well, I ended up using 3 times within the same month. And on the last time, I basically sat down and said, look, this is awesome. I love the shit out of this. And if I don't stop, then I never will. I will absolutely rob banks to get this. I will absolutely destroy lives to get this. I need to stop. So I stopped, and it was a difficult thing to do. Not because I was particularly addicted, but because it was so particularly good that I had to say goodbye. I was literally settling for less after that. How does talking about this make you feel? Nostalgic, really. I was young and strong and healthy and full of potential, and I was succeeding in a lot of things, so it was a good time in my life. But I won't do it again, because it's one of those things that quickly becomes too much, and it'll overwhelm you. And I guess that's the terrifying thing with a lot of these drugs, isn't it? Is this whole idea of chasing the dragon. You know, of experiencing a high so fucking intense that you want to spend the rest of your life just to feel that good again. That's scary. It's spooky. You know that you can feel so good that words can't describe. But that comes with a price, and that price is addiction and chasing the high. So let this do be a warning to people, you know? Think twice before you smoke crack. Think twice before you smoke crack. Absolutely. Think twice before you do heroin. And what I will say is I'm not going to go into the morality of drugs or what have you. It's a personal decision for people to make, and drugs can absolutely be an absolutely positive thing in your life, 100%. Again, they can be the thing that destroy it, you know? So I won't advise you either way. But what I will say is do your research. You know, if you want to experiment with drugs, that is fine and that is your right. But do your research. Make sure you are educated on these things, because, you know, it can be crack is one hell of a drug, you know? It can fuck you up. Again, I've never smoked crack, just FYI, just in case. As we come to the end of this week's episode of the Mind Poppers podcast, what I will say is, you know, an interesting thing, there is a beautiful sense of community around stoners. You know, even stoners that aren't, like, don't know each other super well and what have you, there is this thing amongst stoners, there's an honour amongst stoners where, you know, if you're short, someone might throw you a nudge. You know, it is like a little community. Even people you don't really know will help you out when they can. And in terms of money, you know, when you have to buy it or you owe someone money, you know, stoners will ask people, other stoners who they're not particularly close with, oh, can I borrow 50? Can I borrow 100? There, and I'll give it back to you. And stoners are very willing to share money with each other like that, because, you know, it's like they know, they're like, okay, man, you know, I get it, you know. So there are beautiful sides to it, absolutely. And look, I'm sure there's honor among crackheads. You know, I don't know that. I can only speak from the word that I know. This has been a bit of a weird Mind Poppers episode, hasn't it? You know, just do keep a note. Obviously, I'm not condoning and I'm not condemning the use of drugs. It is a personal choice. It is a personal experience. Do with your journey with what you will. Again, I know that we talked for a bit on the Black Lives Matter movement, and at least my personal ties to it, my emotional ties to it at least. If you do want to find out how to donate more, I have the link in my bio, like I said, on my Instagram. My Instagram is Adam Reilly. Oh, you can head over. I have it there saved. It's a really handy website that will give you the option. It will help you find out and sort out where you want your money to go, where you want your donations to go. So Adam O'Reilly on Instagram. We will be back next week with a whole plateau of new Mind Poppers. Until then, stay woke.